Welcome to Naresh IT. My name is Satish. In the today's session, I am going to be discussing about the constructor and types of constructors in Java. Constructor and types of constructors in Java. Okay, just before going to be starting the constructor, first we can understand what is the need of constructor. So to understand what is the need of constructor, now concentrate a small example. For example, here I have one employee class. In the employee class, two data members I am creating, like employee number and name. These data members are private, and these data members are possible to access within the employee class only. Private members are possible to access within the same class only. By accessing within the same class, here I am providing the initialization. So to provide the initialization for these two variables, what are the employee number and name? Here I am taking two methods. One is set emp number and set name. So these two methods are used to provide what? Initialization for employee number and name. Okay, so take the special care. In this employee class, just I am creating two data members. To provide the initialization to the two data members, here I am using two setter methods. Okay, if 100 data members are there, then we can create 100 setter methods to provide the initialization. And to get these employee details, just I am writing one method like get employee details. It is printing the employee details. Okay, now observe here, I am using this employee class in some another main method class. Here first I am creating an employee object. Okay, after creating employee object, here I am trying to providing the initialization for emp number and name directly by accessing. But whenever I am trying to accessing emp number and name in the test class, compiler is giving one error. That is, variable employee number as private access in employee, variable name as private access in employee. Because these are private members, the private variables, private data members possible to access within that same class only. So directly here, like by accessing, it is not possible to initialize because these are private. So to provide the initialization for employee number and name only, already two methods I am defining, that is set emp number and set name. So by calling the two methods set emp number and set name, I am providing the initialization for emp number and name. And here I am calling the set emp number and set name with the help of this employee object. And these two are non-static methods. The non-static methods possible to call only with the help of an object reference. Here I am using an object reference as what? E. Okay, if you are calling only set emp number, then only emp number is initializing with your value. Okay, name is initializing with what? Default value. You know, in Java, JVM always providing the default initialization for non-static variables. Even though we are not providing the initialization, JVM is providing the default initialization, but the default value of emp number is 0. The default value of name is here null. But instead of depending on the default initialization, okay, here I want to provide my own customized values for emp number and name. So to provide that customized values only, I am calling the setter methods and I am providing the initialization. So if you are not calling set name method, then name value is what? Null. Okay, by calling these two, you can provide the initialization. And to get the details of an employee, Here I am calling which one? Get employee details. But in this example, these two setter methods are very important. These two setter methods I am using to provide the initialization for EMP number and name. Okay, now observe it is working or not. Check. Java C test.java, Java test. Okay, it is working and displaying what? Employee details. But observe with this example, what is the exact need of constructors? What is the exact need of constructors in Java? So now observe, constructor is a special Java member. Constructor is used to create an object and also used to provide an initialization to the properties of an object. In the previous example, properties of an object is nothing but EMP number and name. So constructor is used to create an object and also used to provide an initialization to the properties of an object. In the previous example, here to provide the initialization to these properties of employee object, I am using what? Setter methods. So to provide the initialization to the properties of an object, we can use the setter methods, or we can also use what? Constructor. So constructor is also used to provide the initialization to the properties of an object. So in the place of the setter methods, in the previous example, it is possible to use what? Constructor also to provide the initialization to employee number and name. Okay. Constructor is used to create an object and also used to provide an initialization to the properties of an object. Constructor name and a class name must be same. It is one important rule here. The constructor name and a class name must be same. Means, for example, if you are creating one class like employee, in employee class, here you can define the constructor like this. It is called as what? Constructor. Here the constructor name and a class name must be same. Okay, we can also write the constructor with some parameters also. For example, employee, int EMP number, string and name. So like we can also define the constructor with what? Parameters. So you can create the constructor, okay, like this, employee and employee of int EMP number comma string. And when we are creating the constructor, it is also possible to use what? Some parameters. Okay, now here observe, constructor is executing at the time of creating an object. At the time of creating an object. Okay, for example, here this is your class. If you are creating an object like this, employee is equal to new employee. New employee. With this object creation, here constructor is going to be executing. So constructor is executing in the object creation. Actually in the object creation here we are calling what? Constructor only. And the important point is, constructor is used to provide what? Initialization also. So how we are providing the initialization to the properties of an object? By using constructor. Now observe, similar to previous example, now I am writing int EMP number, string name. To provide the initialization to the properties of these EMP number and name, here we can take some parameters, int EMP number comma string name, and we can provide the initialization. This dot EMP number is equal to EMP number, this dot name is equal to name. So this is called as what? Initialization to the properties of an object. To provide the initialization to the properties of an object, in Java we have what? Setter methods and also what? Constructors. So either we can use constructors or we can use setter methods. Constructor is executing whenever we are creating an object. Setter method is executing on the basis of demand. That means whenever we are calling. So when we can use this setter method to provide the initialization, when we can use this constructor to provide the initialization, exactly at the time of creating an object, if you want to provide the initialization, then we can use constructor. After creating the object, on the basis of demand, if you want to provide the initialization, then we can use what? Setter method. So here, how we can create an object? Now observe, employee is equal to new employee of 101 comma string value like Satish. So here I am creating an object by using what? Constructor. Here in this object creation, okay, two properties also be initializing. 101 is coming to this EMP number. This EMP number value is going to be initializing to here. Here I am using this keyword for which purpose? To access this non-static variable only. Okay, here Satish is coming to this variable name and it is providing the initialization to this another non-static variable what? Name. So the constructors are used to provide what? Initialization to the properties of an object. So we have setter methods to provide the initialization and we have constructors also to provide the initialization to the properties of an object. Okay, so here 3 points just I introduced. Constructor is used to create an object and also used to provide initialization to the properties of an object. Constructor name and class name must be same. Constructor is executing at the time of creating an object. So one more point I am going to be introducing, that is constructor is allows only access modifiers. In Java we have only 4 access modifiers. So the constructor is allows only 4 access modifiers. What are that? Public, private, default and protected. So except these modifiers, if you are using any other modifier by mistake, then compile time error will occur. Okay, now here observe one example. For example, here I am writing one class, public class employee. Here I am writing private employee. Okay, it is called as what? Constructor. The constructor I am declaring with one access modifier, that is private. Constructor is allows total 4 access modifiers. Non-access modifiers are not allowed by constructor. So now check it is valid or not. Java C employee.java. So now it is valid. For example, here this constructor I am declaring with static by mistake. Then what happens here? A compile time error is occurs. The compile time error is like what? Modifier static not allowed here. Because the constructor is allows only 4 access modifiers: public, private, default, protected. Non-access modifiers are not allowed by constructor. Okay, another important point is the constructor looks like a method. But method syntax always contain return type. Method contain return type, but constructor not contain any return type. Okay, for example, here if you are writing like this, void display, void display. It is called as what? Method. Here it is a return type of that method. Here it is a constructor. Constructor also looks like a method, but method contain the return type. Constructor does not contain any return type. Okay, now here observe, when this constructor executing practically once, system.out.println of emp constructor. Okay, now I am going to be creating one object, public static void main string array args. Here I am creating an object of employee, employee emp, employee E1 is equal to new employee, employee E2 is equal to new employee. So like this. So total how many objects I am created as? 2 objects. So now the constructor is executing 2 times, Java employee. So the constructor is executed 2 times because the constructor is executing at the time of creating an object. Okay, one more important point is, every Java class compulsory contains at least one constructor. At least one constructor, that is either programmer defined constructor or compiler generated constructor. Either programmer defined constructor or compiler generated constructor. In this employee class, okay, in this employee class, here there are no, in this employee class, there is no constructor. There is no constructor. So when we are compiling this employee class, compiler is generating one constructor, that is called as default constructor. So now check, compiler is generating or not. First compile this one. Okay, after compiling, a dot class file is generated. If you want to get the profile of the dot class file, if you want to get the profile of the dot class file, we can use Java P command. Java P employee. So here in this employee class, okay, compiler is generated one constructor, that is called as here default constructor. So every Java class contain at least one constructor. Okay, either programmer defined constructor or compiler generated constructor. Suppose if programmer is defining any constructor, then compiler not generating again any constructor. So now check, in this employee I am defining one constructor with one parameter emp number. So now after compilation, the same constructor is available or not, check by using Java P command. So in this, here the same constructor is available and compiler is not generated any constructor. Okay, now the important point is, every Java class contain at least one constructor, that is either programmer defined constructor or compiler generated constructor. Okay, in this example, this is called as what? Programmer defined constructor. Okay, that is any constructor. There is any constructor that is executing at the time of creating an object only. Okay, now here in this example, I am using one constructor and 2 objects I am creating. So the constructor is executing how many times is? 2 times. Now the important point is, just now we discussed, constructor looks like a method, but method syntax contain return type. Constructor syntax not contain any return type. Suppose by mistake if you are providing the return type to the constructor, then what happens? By mistake if you are providing the return type to the constructor, then what happens? Here suppose by mistake we are provided one return type to this constructor. No compile time error, no runtime exception. This is a considered as a method only. So by mistake if you are providing any return type to the constructor, that is always considered as a method. Whenever this is considered as a method, okay, here there are no constructors, then compiler will generate what? Default constructor. By using that default constructor, Here the two employee objects are creating by JVM. By using the default constructor, two employee objects are creating by JVM. So now check, okay, it is considering as a method or not, check. It is now considering as a method. Compile and use Java P command to get the profile of employee class. Here now observe, void employee, that is a consider as what? A method. Because of that reason, here compiler is generated one constructor, that is default constructor. Okay, here by mistake if you are using any return type to the constructor, no compile time error, no exception, that is considered as a method. And whenever that is considered as a method, if there are no constructors in that class, compiler will generate default constructor. Okay, so here the important points about constructor is used to create an object and also used to provide initialization to the properties of an object. Constructor is executing at the time of creating an object. Constructor name and class name must be same. Constructor is allowed only 4 access modifiers. Non-access modifiers are not allowed by constructor. Constructor syntax looks like a method, but constructor syntax not allows any return type. Construct is executing at the time of creating an object. And every Java class contain at least one constructor, that is either programmer created constructor or compiler generated constructor. Okay. How many types of constructors are possible in Java? Now observe, in Java, it is possible to create total 2 types of constructors. One is user defined constructors, another one is default constructor. This default constructor is always a 0 argument constructor, and this default constructor is generating by compiler. But compiler is generating whenever programmer not provided any constructor only. User defined constructors are nothing but programmer created constructors. As per the application requirement, it is possible to create 0 argument constructors and it is possible to create parameterized constructors in the application. Here the important point is, programmer created 0 argument constructor is not a default constructor, but default constructor is always a 0 argument constructor. Programmer created 0 argument constructor is not default constructor, but default constructor is always a 0 argument constructor. Okay, now how to write the 0 argument constructor and parameterizer constructor? Now here observe, in the previous example, for example here I have class employee. Okay, similarly here I am writing one more constructor, employee int emp number comma string name. So in this example observe, it is called as what? 0 argument constructor. It is called as what? Parameterized constructor. So as per the requirement we can write 0 argument and parameterized constructor. And in the previous example, here in the place of setter methods, now I am using constructor to provide the initialization. So how to use? Okay, now observe, employee int emp number comma string name. In the place of that setter methods I am using now constructor. This dot emp number is equal to emp number, this dot name is equal to name. It is called as what? One parameterizer constructor. This constructor I am using for which purpose? To provide the initialization to the properties of a object. Okay, so this constructor I am using to provide the initialization to the properties of an object. So now observe how to use this constructor. Here setter methods already deleted. and create the object by supplying the required values 101 comma Satish. So previous example to your difference is, in the previous example the two properties are initializing via setter methods. Now initializing via constructor. Okay, this is what? Object creation. This object I am creating by using one parameterizer constructor. So now, okay, what is the file name is test.java. So properly it is working or not, check. Java C test.java, Java test. So like this we can utilize the constructors to create an object and to provide the initialization to the properties of an object. Thank you for watching. For more videos you can subscribe Naresh IT YouTube channel.